From my earliest memories, I knew I was a disappointment. My parents never said it outright, they didn't have to. It was evident in the way they looked at me when I was born, hoping for a boy, their firstborn, the continuation of the family name. Later, when my younger sister Catherine was born 3 years after me, their reaction spoke volumes. My mother smiled wearily, and my father, patting her shoulder, quietly remarked, "Maybe the next one will be a boy." I overheard this conversation while sitting on the stairs, and those words etched themselves into my memory. But there wasn't another child. After Catherine's birth, the doctors told my mother she couldn't have any more children. Their dreams of a son were shattered, but they found solace in the hope of grandchildren their daughters might one day give them. These dreams lingered in our modest suburban home, where Catherine, even from a young age, knew how to capture our parents' attention. She was the favorite, masterfully playing on their emotions with her big brown eyes and angelic smile. They melted for her like ice cream on a hot day. Meanwhile, I gradually faded into the background, a child who had everything she needed, from clothes to food to an education, but who lacked the most essential thing, warmth. I got used to it. I learned early on to take care of myself, to build an inner fortress of independence. I understood that vying for their love was futile. If they noticed me at all, it was only to point out my flaws. This made me strong. Or at least, I thought it did. In high school, I decided to make an important announcement. At dinner, as my mom set the table and my dad read the newspaper, I said I was going to study economics. My mom froze, her fork suspended midair. "Are you sure, dear? That's such a technical field," she said, looking at me with doubt. My dad set down his paper and echoed her sentiment, adding that teaching or nursing would be much better professions for a girl. But I stood my ground. My grades were good enough to earn a partial scholarship to the state university. "Well, it's your choice," my mom said coolly, and the disappointment in her voice was almost comforting in its predictability. In contrast, Catherine, still in high school, declared that she wanted to study psychology. My parents immediately beamed, and my mom exclaimed, "That's wonderful, dear. You've always been so kind to people." I just pushed peas around my plate in silence. These scenes no longer stirred strong emotions in me. I had accepted that I would never be who they wanted me to be. Instead, I focused on my future and what college might bring. State University was a whole new world for me. I relished the chance to be away from home, where no one expected me to be perfect. It was there, in my sophomore year, that I met James. He was a senior in the economics department, tall, with a slight smirk that seemed to say the world was his playground. We literally bumped into each other in the finance section of the library when I, lost in thoughts about an upcoming exam, walked straight into him, dropping my books. He laughed as he helped pick them up and said, "You do know these are graduate-level textbooks, right?" We started talking, and I learned that he specialized in macroeconomics and planned to work at a major analytics firm. His confidence and ambition were unlike anything I'd encountered before. James often joked that I was too serious and made it his mission to draw me out of my shell, even if it meant walking me through complex problems I couldn't figure out. We began dating, and for the first time, I felt noticed, needed. James didn't see me as a disappointment but as someone with potential. He inspired me to dream bigger, to see my future in brighter hues than I'd ever dared to imagine. But deep down, a question nagged at me: what would happen if I brought him home? How would my parents react to my first serious boyfriend? I dropped my statistics textbook, and he picked it up. That's how our story began. "You're in Professor Martinez's macroeconomics class, right?" he asked as he handed the book back to me, his voice soft with a hint of curiosity. "I've seen you asking all those smart questions." I blushed. I wasn't used to being noticed in a positive way. "Yeah, that's me. The annoying person who makes class run late," I muttered, hoping the joke would mask my embarrassment. "You're not annoying," he said with a smile. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime. I could tell you about the advanced courses you'll be taking next year. It was unexpected. I'd been invited for coffee. Someone noticed me. I said yes, though I felt a twinge of nervousness. Our first coffee turned into dinner, dinner into a movie, and soon we were inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt important. James didn't compare me to others or try to change me. He just loved me for who I was. After graduation, James got a job at Anderson Consulting while I finished my degree. He waited patiently for me to graduate, supporting me in every way. When I earned my diploma, we decided to move in together. Our small downtown apartment wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and we loved it. The moment I introduced James to my parents was a test for me. "Mom, Dad, this is James," I said, watching their reactions closely. The change in their demeanor was immediate. "Oh, James," my mom practically squealed. "We're so happy to finally meet you." My dad patted James on the shoulder. "Son, Jenna has told us so much about you. Join us for Christmas." The word "son" stuck in my mind. They had gotten what they had always dreamed of, even if not directly. James charmed them with his confidence, his talk of work, and his plans for the future. They asked when he planned to settle down and when we would have children. Meanwhile, Catherine sat in the corner, sullenly watching the scene unfold. She was still living at home after finishing college, having not found a serious boyfriend, and it was clear she was envious. This time, I was the sister who had what she wanted. A year into living together, James proposed. It happened during a quiet dinner at home. He pulled out a ring and got down on one knee. "Will you marry me?" I immediately said yes. We decided to have a small wedding, despite my parents' protests. "This is your big day, Jenna. Don't you want something more special?" my mom asked. But for us, it was exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in a garden, surrounded by our closest friends and family. James and I exchanged vows, and afterward, we returned to our apartment to begin married life in the place that had already become our home. It was the start of a new chapter, simple but full of hope and love. The question of children came up almost immediately after the honeymoon. "So when can we expect good news?" my mom asked, her eyes glinting with barely concealed impatience. I tried my best to stay calm. "We're saving for a house first," I explained repeatedly. "We want to be financially stable before starting a family." But my words seemed to go unheard. My dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Your mother and I had nothing when we started out, and we managed just fine." Every family dinner turned into a news bulletin about other people's children. "Did you hear? The Hendersons became grandparents again, another boy," my mom would announce, beaming as though it were her own achievement. Or, "The Smith's daughter just announced she's pregnant. And she's younger than you, Jenna." These conversations seemed endless. But 2 years later, James and I finally bought our first home. It wasn't much, a modest house with a small yard on the edge of town. The moment we signed the mortgage papers, I knew the pressure about children would only intensify. And it did. What I didn't expect happened 3 months later. "I'm pregnant," Catherine announced at Sunday dinner, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. The news landed like a bolt of lightning. My dad lit up, my mom gasped, and she immediately began planning, even though none of us had warm feelings toward Mark, Catherine's boyfriend. He disappeared as soon as it became clear Catherine was truly expecting. She moved back in with our parents, and instead of scandal or judgment, their home became a sanctuary for the future granddaughter. When Emily was born, you'd think she had been crowned a princess. My parents transformed Catherine's room into a nursery, bought furniture, toys, and anything imaginable. My mom glowed as she cradled Emily, as if the baby were the embodiment of her own dreams. "Isn't Catherine the perfect mother?" my mom would say, looking at me. Don't you want one of your own, Jenna? Those words stung more than I anticipated. But what truly broke my heart was how James interacted with Emily. He became a completely different person when he was with her. He'd get down on the floor, make silly faces, read picture books, and laugh with her. My mom watched in awe. James is so natural with children, she said meaningfully. He's going to make such a wonderful father. I began doubting myself. Anxiety grew within me. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What was wrong with me? But instead of sharing these fears with James, I decided to take action. I started tracking my cycle, taking vitamins, and researching every piece of advice on planning for a pregnancy. Month after month, we tried. Month after month, nothing happened. Each failed attempt added a new weight to my shoulders. And James, it seemed, spent more and more time with Emily. She's such a sweet kid, he said as we drove home one evening. Did you see how she's starting to walk now? I nodded, smiled, but inside, I was crumbling. I saw how my mom praised him for his patience, how she said he would be an amazing father. The feeling grew, became unbearable. After a year of failed attempts, I could no longer ignore my fears. What if something's wrong? The thoughts slowly consumed me, poisoning my hopes. But I kept convincing myself it would happen when the time was right. It had to, didn't it? I tried to stay positive. These things take time, I told myself, trying to silence the doubts. But when my mom found out that James and I had been trying unsuccessfully for a year, she panicked. A year, Jenna? That's not normal. You need to see a doctor immediately. Her voice was filled with alarm, her gaze heavy with reproach. She immediately began bombarding me with contacts for fertility specialists, as if this were a rescue mission. By the time I left their house that day, my phone was filled with clinic numbers and recommendations. I made an appointment just to get them off my back. James went with me, holding my hand in the sterile doctor's office. His presence was somewhat calming, but the tension inside me grew with every passing second. The doctor spoke softly, asking questions and explaining the tests we'd need to undergo. Ultrasounds, blood tests, endless clinic visits followed. Then came the day of the results. I'm sorry, the doctor said gently, looking me directly in the eyes. But the results show that you're infertile. The word struck me like a thunderclap. The air seemed to leave my lungs. James squeezed my hand, but I barely felt it. The doctor continued, discussing treatment options, IVF possibilities, adoption, but her voice sounded distant, as though it was coming through a thick veil of water. That night, James and I sat at the kitchen table, our takeout dinner growing cold in front of us. We could consider IVF or adoption, he said, breaking the silence. There are options, Jenna. I nodded, but I felt shattered. Emptiness filled every part of me. How could I tell my family? I decided it was best to do it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. At the next family dinner, when a rare lull fell over the table, I summoned the courage. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something, I began, feeling my chest tighten. James and I saw a specialist, and I took a deep breath. I can't have children. I'm infertile. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's face contorted with indignation. Infertile, she spat, as though the word itself was poison. What kind of woman can't even do the one thing she's meant to do? My father didn't lift his eyes, his voice cold and detached. An empty vessel. Just a barren flower. Catherine sat in the corner, smirking as she bounced Emily on her lap. Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is now, she quipped. I turned to James for support, but he sat silently, staring at his plate. Hot tears began streaming down my face. I pushed back my chair abruptly and ran out of the house, ignoring their voices calling after me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to return there. But James continued visiting them. He spent time with Emily, chatted with Catherine, and listened to my parents' stories. He'd come home full of anecdotes. Emily learned a new song, he'd say, his face lighting up. You should have seen her dancing. Or, Catherine made lasagna. She's actually a really good cook. Each word was like a knife to my heart. I lay awake at night, listening to his steady breathing, wondering, does he blame me? Is he angry that I can't give him a child? The guilt gnawed at me like an insatiable predator. Every visit he made to my family, every new story about Emily or Catherine, felt like salt in an open wound. James seemed happy when he spoke about them, but I felt the chasm between us growing wider, and I didn't know how to bridge it. It was a regular Tuesday, the day my world fell apart. I came home early from work, my arms full of takeout Chinese food, James's favorite. I smiled, imagining his reaction when he saw the surprise. But the house was empty. The darkness greeted me like a cold void. James's car wasn't in the driveway, which was odd. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself he was probably working late or had stopped at the store. I dialed his number. The phone rang, but there was no answer. I tried again. This time, it went to voicemail. Anxiety started tightening its grip on my chest and my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Catherine Thompson has posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, but something compelled me to open this one. The screen loaded, and my heart clenched at the sight. James was sitting on the couch at my parents' house. Emily was nestled comfortably on his lap, and Catherine was leaning against his shoulder. All three of them were smiling, like one big happy family. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys. The rational part of my mind tried to find an explanation for this. Maybe it was just an innocent moment. But deep down, I already knew the answer. The entire way to my parents' house, I kept replaying every interaction between James and Catherine over the past year in my mind. Everything was starting to come together in a terrifying picture. Their driveway was filled with cars, my mom's minivan, my dad's truck, and James's sedan. I entered through the unlocked door. My steps were quiet, but my heart was pounding so loudly I thought they might hear me. Voices came from the living room. "James, we already think of you as a son," my mom said. "You deserve to be happy. You were so wonderful with Emily," my dad added. "And Catherine. She's young, fertile. You could have so many children together. Why stay trapped in a marriage with," my mom lowered her voice, but I still heard the word full of disgust, "a barren woman." The world around me spun, my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. I stormed into the living room, causing everyone to freeze. Mom, Dad, and Catherine were sitting on the same couch. James had settled into Dad's chair, and little Emily was playing with blocks on the floor. The scene looked like something from a nightmare, one big family making plans without me. What the hell is going on here? My voice came out louder than I felt. James at least tried to look embarrassed, but my parents showed no remorse. Mom stood up, chin raised. "We're just honestly discussing what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" My voice trembled. "You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister." "Someone needs to think about his future," Dad interrupted. "You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves." "But I can," Catherine interjected with a self-satisfied smile. I turned to James, locking my gaze onto his face, waiting for him to defend our marriage, to say that all this was madness. But he stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "James?" My name hung in the air like a question I was afraid to hear the answer to. He looked up, and I saw something broken in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Jenna," he said quietly. "But they're right. I want children. A family. And I have feelings for Catherine. The world around me seemed to shatter into pieces. Catherine reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, as if emphasizing her victory. Get out, she hissed. You don't belong here anymore. This is my family now. I looked at their faces. The cold satisfaction on my mother's, the triumphant smile on Catherine's, my father's stern look, James's guilty avoidance. All those years of marriage, my whole life, my family, it all felt meaningless. I silently turned and left without saying a word. I went home a few days after that awful night, packed a suitcase on autopilot, and left a note for James, divorce papers. My lawyer will contact you. The divorce was quick, almost mechanical. We split everything in half. The house we had once dreamed of making our cozy nest went to him. I found a small apartment on the other side of the city, far enough that I would never have to run into them. I threw myself into work, as if I could drown out the pain in the noise of office calls and deadlines. But social media, as always, knew how to hurt. One morning, sitting in the break room with coworkers, I heard one of them gasp, staring at her phone. "Oh, Jenna. I'm so sorry. I forgot to unfollow your sister." She tried to hide the screen, but it was too late. I saw the picture, Catherine in a huge white dress, James in a tuxedo, my parents beaming beside them. The caption read, "The happiest day of my life. Now we are a family." I smiled, forcing my lips to tremble only on the inside. "It's fine," I said, although it was a lie. But the worst was yet to come. A year later, there was another post. "Welcome to the world, baby Rose." Catherine had given birth to a girl. James finally had the perfect family, Emily, whom he had adopted, and now his child with Catherine. That day, I deleted all my social media accounts, swearing that I would never let them invade my life again. But life is a strange thing. Sometimes it turns in the most unexpected ways. One Saturday, while grocery shopping at the supermarket, I collided my cart with someone else's. "I'm so sorry," a deep, soft voice said. I looked up and met the kindest brown eyes I had ever seen. "My name is Michael," he said, helping me gather the fallen items. "Can I buy you a coffee?" As an apology for my clumsiness. One coffee turned into dinner. Dinner into a date. And the date into a story that gradually filled my life with warmth. 6 months later, I decided it was time to tell him the truth. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," I began. "I can't have children. I'm infertile." He took my hands in his voice full of confidence. "Jenna, I love you. If we want children, we can adopt. And if not, that's fine too. I just want to be with you." We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. No expensive dresses, no cumbersome expectations or family drama, just us and a few close friends. A year after the wedding, I began to notice that something was wrong. Morning sickness, dizziness. Michael insisted I see a doctor. "Mrs. Chen," the doctor smiled as she looked at the results. "Congratulations, you're pregnant." I stared at her, unable to believe it. "This is impossible. I'm infertile. I have tests to prove it." She smiled gently. The human body can be mysterious. Despite everything, pregnancy can still occur even in diagnosed infertility. It's rare, but it happens. That night, Michael and I cried. Tears of joy, disbelief, and hope mixed together as he held me in his arms. I decided not to tell my family. They had lost the right to share in this happiness. 9 months later, I held my son in my arms, weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces. We named him Alexander, protector of humanity. Looking at his tiny face, I felt nothing but pure, absolute love. No bitterness, no regrets, no anger, just gratitude. My life fell into a new rhythm. Alexander became the center of our world, Michael the perfect father, and I finally had everything I had once only dreamed of. We rarely ate out, preferring cozy family dinners in our small kitchen, where Alexander was always the center of attention. But that evening was special. Michael had received a promotion, and we decided to celebrate at Lamb's Own, a French restaurant downtown, known for its atmosphere and exquisite cuisine. When we walked in, the soft glow of candlelight and the quiet hum of conversation filled the space. Everything seemed perfect until my gaze fell on a corner booth in the shadows. At first, I thought I had made a mistake. But no. It was Catherine, my sister. She was sitting close to a man I definitely didn't know. They were engrossed in each other, her fingers carelessly running through his hair, her lips lightly brushing his face. It was more than friendly intimacy. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and took several pictures. The lighting was dim, but the photos were clear enough to leave no doubt about what was happening. In that moment, Michael noticed that I had gone pale. "Are you okay?" His voice sounded concerned. I showed him the photos. He immediately understood. "Are you going to send them?" My finger hovered over the send button. It would have been so easy, one click, and the perfect family they had built on the ruins of mine would shatter into pieces. But no. I put the phone away, saving the pictures in a secure folder. "I'm better than they are," I said quietly but firmly. A year passed. Alexander grew, becoming a reflection of our love, Michael's kind eyes, my stubborn chin. His laughter filled our home, turning it into a place where the pain of the past no longer had a place. We rarely went back to my old neighborhood, but that day we decided to take a walk to the park after visiting a friend. That was when I saw them. Mom, Dad, Catherine, and James were loading bags into a car at the supermarket. Their faces froze when they saw us. Their first reaction was to turn away, as if we were strangers. But then their gaze fell on Alexander. He was holding my hand, chattering about his toy truck. Mom stopped dead in her tracks. "Who is this?" Her voice sounded like she already knew the answer. Maybe I could have ignored them. Maybe I should have. But I stopped, instinctively knowing that I was no longer afraid. "This is my son, Alexander," I said in a steady voice. Catherine laughed, sharply and awkwardly. "Oh, please. We all know you can't have children. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I looked her straight in the eye, savoring the moment. "I gave birth to him 3 years ago. No adoption agency was involved." My mother took a step forward, her face expressing confusion. "This is impossible," she murmured. "Doctors make mistakes," I snapped. "It's rare, but it happens. And here's the proof." I pointed to Alexander, who was watching them curiously. My father's eyes widened. "Grandson," he whispered. "We have a grandson." They moved toward us, and my mother reached out her hands, as though she had every right to embrace my child. I stood in front of Alexander, shielding him. "No," I said firmly. "You lost that right when you betrayed me." Catherine frowned, her face darkening with irritation. "Oh, get a grip, Jenna," she spat. "You managed to have one child, big deal. But I still won. I have your husband. I have a real family. 2 daughters. Admit it, I'm better than you'll ever be." My hand was already reaching for my phone before she finished her tirade. "Speaking of family, Catherine," I said, activating the screen with icy calm. "Why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" "What are you talking about?" James squinted, his gaze darting between me and the phone, as though he were trying to piece together a puzzle that had long been scattered. I pulled out my phone, opened the secure folder, and displayed the pictures from the restaurant. "Here's your loving wife," I said, handing him the phone. having dinner with someone else. Though, I must say, Catherine, people usually don't kiss their colleagues over dinner. Catherine paled. Her hands twitched nervously, as if she was trying to come up with an explanation for what was happening. But James had already grabbed the phone. "Who is this?" His voice trembled with fury, and I could see his face change, from confusion to realization. He's just a coworker," Catherine stammered, her voice barely holding on to its previous confidence. "Friends don't kiss like I saw in those photos," I said coldly, leaning on Alexander's stroller. "And they definitely don't hide in dark corners of fancy restaurants while their spouses are at home with the kids." "Catherine, how could you?" James almost whispered, but his words landed like a blow. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, as if she had just seen the world come crashing down. "After everything we've done for you." Her voice trailed off. I couldn't help but laugh. "After everything you've done?" I turned to my mother. "For example, helping Catherine steal my husband? Abandoning me because you thought I couldn't have children? Karma, right?" James and Catherine started shouting at each other right there in the parking lot. Their accusations and justifications mixed into an incoherent stream of words that sounded like background noise. I knelt beside Alexander, adjusting his jacket. "Come on, sweetie," I said, taking his hand. "It's time to go home." We left them in their chaos. Alexander happily chattered about the park, completely unaware of the nuclear explosion left behind. A month later, I heard the remnants of the story from the locals. James, suspecting that Catherine had an affair, got tested. It turned out he was infertile. Rose, the daughter Catherine had claimed was his, couldn't have been his child. James immediately left Catherine. He refused to pay child support for either Rose or Emily. Catherine returned to our parents' house, and her perfect life turned to ruins. After that, they tried to contact me. Calls, letters, emails, they even showed up at our house unannounced. "Please, Jenna," my mother pleaded through the door. "We made a terrible mistake. Let us be part of Alexander's life. He's our only grandson." I stood at the door, holding Alexander in my arms, and replied calmly, "You should have thought about that before you called me an empty vessel. Actions have consequences." Michael fully supported me. He sat beside me, watching our son, who was playing on the floor. "Family isn't DNA," he said. "It's love, respect, and devotion. They didn't show you any of that." He was right. Looking at my small family, the husband who loved me no matter what, whether I could have children or not, and the son who became our miracle, I felt that I had everything I needed. Our home was filled with laughter and joy, and I knew that sometimes the family you are born into is not the one fate has intended for you. Sometimes, you have to build your own family with those who choose you in return. I chose Michael. He chose me. We chose Alexander. And he chose us with his first smile, his first word, his first steps. That's what real family means. I wouldn't want my life to have turned out any other way.